In the previous video we used CSS style sheets. In this video we will be looking into PyQt5's slots and signals. And we'll be using the designer to connect slots to signals. We'll be creating a custom slot. We'll be looking into understanding the newly created UI dependencies. And one term is called loose coupling. In PyQt5, event handling is also called slots and signals. And we can use the designer to use some built-in signals. And the first thing we want to do is we want to reopen our signal and slot editor. We had closed that at the beginning because we didn't need it. And now we need it. So to do that, we can go to View and Signal Slot Editor. Click on this one. And that one opens up the editor in the right bottom corner again. The designer comes with different modes. And so far we've only been in the Edit Widget mode. And we can change to the Edit Signal Slots mode. And we can do this in two different ways. We can click this button here, the toolbar button, Edit Signal Slots. Or we can also go to Edit and select Edit Signal Slots. So this now, when we hover the mouse over our areas, we can see that different things get highlighted. And I've already done one thing here. So when you click on the button and then drag with the left mouse button, push down, drag to the label, there comes a dialog box that pops up and we can select click here. So there's a pre-built function in the designer and we can select it. I've done that already here. So when we do on the click event, we want to clear the label. So when the Q push button gets clicked, this should happen here. And there's not much in here, but there are also, like this checkbox down here, we can also inherit from other Q widgets or from Q widgets, so that opens up more built-in methods. And as we can see, that's the wrong button name, but that's a different UI design here. So the push button 2, when it gets clicked, the receiver is the label and the slot is clear. So slot means method. So when the push button 2 gets clicked, that's the signal, the receiver is the label, and what should happen is the label should get cleared. And we can preview this form and click it. And I switch the buttons around. So basically within the designer, we added some functionality in the UI design. So after we convert the UI file to a Python file, that's this file here, we can run it. And again, I messed the button names up, so ignore what says button 2 and what says button 1. But this button on the left hand side clears the label. And this just converted from the UI file itself. And down here we can see that push button 2 clicked connect to self label.clear. So this one line of code got added by us using the slots and signals editor within the designer itself. So back in the designer, we can also right click a button and select change text. And that lets us change the text on the button. And we also can right click it and say change object name. I did that. So now I renamed the push button to push button underscore clear. And this should still be okay because we are not calling this object name from our Python code yet. So we also can right click it. Object names are clearer. We should do that as early as possible. So after converting the file from UI to Py, I'm importing it here and let's run it just to make sure it really still works, because changing object names, as we said before, can break something. So here, clear label has different text now and it still clears the label, and button 1 still writes the Windows title into the label. So right now it's all still working well. So actually what I've already done is I used our other push button, our other object here, added this one line of code, clicked connect, and then called this method set label, and here we're getting the main window title, and I had already done that. So we can clear the label that came from the UI, and we can rewrite, we can set the label with our other button, and we do that in the importing Python module. So we are importing it from here, the UI, and here now we're adding functionality, and typically we will want to add more and more functionality outside of the GUI. Now we can also create our own personal slots, and one example is I put another push button onto tab 2, so this one belongs to tab 2, the signals and slots. So what I did is I dragged a line to the main window title, and when we let go, we get this dialog box, and when we say clicked, this was not there, it's empty, because there's no built-in function what shall happen when the button gets clicked. in regards to the main window. But there's an edit button at the bottom, and when you click it, it fills in slot 1, and that's what I've done. You can do plus. So you can add your own slot, and it seems kind of cool. We'll try it out in a moment. So when we preview our UI in the designer with our new personalized slot, and we can push a push button, nothing happens, we don't get an error either. It seems to be working fine. But when we import our UI design into our Python file and run it, we get a big error saying QMainWindow object has no attribute slot 1. So the slot 1 has been added during the conversion to the file here, and we're importing this file. But when we run it, it just throws an exception because it doesn't know what slot 1 is actually. So we can assign a slot. We can give the main window a slot 1 and then tell it what it should do. And there's a little function in here. So let's say when slot 1 gets invoked, we set the window title to slot 1 got clicked. And when we now run it, it no longer gives us an exception, and it writes to the Windows title. So this works, but as you can see, if we start creating lots of custom slots in the designer and the UI, we might end up with a whole bunch of exceptions. So while the slot signal mechanism in the designer looks neat with all the colors and so on, what we're really doing is we're embedding functionality into the code of the UI. And that gets very confusing, and we're creating UI dependencies. So I think it's really much better to separate the UI design from any functionality. Right now we have one button that clears the label, and that code is in a different file because we created that in the designer. And the other button is the code is in the code file. So it gets really confusing. And as we saw with just now with a personal slot, with a custom slot, we got an exception. So I think it's a much better design to don't put any functionality into the UI, but keep it outside, keep it here in the importing module. And this is also called loose coupling. So what we've actually been doing by using the slots and creating our own slots in the designer, we created some dependencies that is not loose coupling. So loose coupling is better. In this video, we looked into PyQt5 signal and slot mechanism. In the next video, we will be overloading widgets.